Hi, I'm Doug from Dynamic Computing, and welcome to episode 88 of 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast. Now, this is the third part in a series that's now going to conclude me building an Amiga 2000 from parts and pieces. I have to say, it turned out pretty good, really not half bad at all. Now, in episode 1, I covered all the guts of the Amiga and a little bit of the story of how I got this Amiga and why it ended up in parts and pieces. We went over the history of the Amiga 2000, all the components in it. In episode 2, part 2, we worked on the power supply and found out it had a really nice Bigfoot power supply. And we ended up installing the operating system on there and getting a working system using my A2091 SCSI card with 2 megs of RAM and a SCSI to SD from Inertial Computing and a Romulator from Amiga on the Lake. And that's where the Amiga 2000 project took a big U-turn about 10 days ago. Now, I was pretty content with the performance of the system with its 68,000 processor. It really wasn't bad. I lived with my Amiga 500 for years with just the 68,000 CPU and 1 meg of RAM. It ran really quite nice, and I ended up doing another installation of Workbench 1.3 so I could boot up the Romulator, tell it to go to 1.3, and have a different SD card in there to boot Workbench 1.3, and it was working pretty good. Then I decided to set up my network using my A2065 networking card that I talked about. Did this on Workbench 3.1.4, of course. And I figured 1 meg of chip RAM and 2 megs of fast RAM, I'm going to at least be able to do the basics like, FTP into my other machine so I can transfer data. Well, no, not really. I put AMI FTP on there. It was just so slow to launch and it would barely work. I mean, it was to the point where it wasn't even fun to try to get what I wanted to be done on a machine of this power level. Okay, I admit it, I'm spoiled rotten by my 040 machines, my 060 machine, and my 2 Vampire machines, okay? Spoiled rotten. I love having a minimum of 64 megabytes of memory on an Amiga because at that point you can do just about anything that you need to do. I'm not a big gamer. If all I wanted to do was play some video games, a 1 or 2 meg Amiga is just fine. But when you're talking productivity software and working with video and audio and pictures, 1 or 2 or 3 megabytes just isn't enough. So I did a bit of research and I ended up deciding on a TerribleFire 534 Accelerator device. I decided on this to give me a faster CPU, more fast RAM, and a nice hard drive interface. Now, the one that I picked is sold by our good friends at amigastore.eu and was put together by our good friend Edu Arana. Of course, the TerribleFire itself was designed by Stephen Leary. He did all the work, he put all the effort into it, and he released it on GitHub so people could make and set up their own TerribleFires. Now, this won't be a review of the TerribleFire. I'll save that for another time. But let's go over some of the basics and take a closer look at it. Come with me. Here's the little TerribleFire right here, the interface board itself, this little green puppy. Now, this comes with a 68030 CPU clocked between 33 and 50 megahertz. Now, mine is the overclocked 48 megahertz version. It has 4 megabytes of 32-bit fast RAM on board, a 68882 FPU, and an IDE header, 44-pin IDE header. You see I've got a CF card adapter on mine. It generally connects right up to the 68,000 chip in your machine like an A1000, A500, or A2000. It just replaces the 68,000 chip. But if you have an Amiga 2000 like me, they have this interface board available. This one was designed by Kipper2K, and this plugs into the 68,000 interface on the card and then fits into the CPU slot that I talked about in episode 1. and really makes it much easier to use, much easier to access. You don't have to take everything apart if you want to get to your CF card and pull it out, etc. Makes for a really nice little interface. Now, the biggest complaint that people have about the TerribleFire cards is the lack of RAM. This is real 32-bit fast RAM. The 68030 could access 128 megs of it in its sleep. It wouldn't have any problem at all. And a lot of the competitive products have 8 megs, 16 megs, 32, 64, whatever, or maybe even a SIM socket on here. So Steve and Larry got a lot of heat for that. But doing some research on it, it turns out this is 5-volt RAM, and it's almost impossible to get 5-volt RAM in higher density that's going to fit on a card like this. And so it's really limited to just 4 megabytes. And from what I understand, his opinion is, if you want a board with more RAM, go buy a different accelerator or design one yourself. And, you know, I guess I kind of get that. He's kind of off-putting to some people, but you know, I get what he's saying. If I want something more powerful than this, this is less than 200 bucks. I'll spend an extra 150. I'll go out and I'll get a Vampire for $350 with 128 megs of RAM and a 68080 interface on it. That would make life much easier. Now see how the TerribleFire card just slots right in here using that special CPU slot adapter, plugs right in. It's a great replacement for an Amiga 2000 accelerator card, most of which have not been made in years. Fits right in there, gives you easy access to your CF card if you just want to pop the lid off and take your CF card for a little data transfer. Actually turned out pretty nice. So in went the TerribleFire card, giving me 4 megabytes of fast RAM, a megabyte of chip RAM, a fast 68030 running at 48 megahertz, and a reasonably fast IDE. After I installed everything and had Amiga OS 3.1.4 running, it left me with about 2.5 to 3 megabytes of free RAM when everything was said and done. Much better than the 2 megabytes I was dealing with just the 2091 card. Performance was good, but it's not as snappy as in a standard Amiga 1200 with some fast RAM expansion, and that's because the AGA chipset has a much wider data path, so it can transfer things back and forth between chip RAM, fast RAM, and CPU faster on the AGA, but it was still zippy. Workbench felt much snappier, even in 8-color mode, and all the programs I tried definitely felt much snappier. Hard drive performance is slower than I expected. A lot of people online say they get 2 to 4 megabytes per second hard drive speed with the TerribleFires. I was coming in at 700 to 900 kilobytes per second. That's way too low, but I think it's the CF card or possibly the CF card interface I'm using. So I'll look into that and find another way to do it and get the hard drive speed up there. But you know me, I wasn't done yet. I wanted more RAM so I could do things like run iBrowse and other internet programs, so I could download things from AmiNet. And even the 4 megabytes of fast RAM on the TerribleFire just wasn't quite cutting it. So I installed my nice A2091 card back in the machine with its 2 megabytes of 24-bit fast RAM. Now I had read that there's an issue where the TerribleFire does not necessarily play nice with other devices with SCSI on them. And it's true, it wouldn't see my SCSI devices. I didn't play around with it too much because I was using the IDE, but it saw the RAM perfectly well. That extra 2 megabytes of RAM gave me a total of 6 megabytes of fast RAM, 4 32-bit, 2 24-bit, and that really helped a lot being able to run programs. My mind started wandering though, and I started thinking about that Octagon card that I tried in the last episode, and it came back and it said the card was defective. I started thinking, was it just the SCSI that was bad on there, and maybe the memory's fine? There's a jumper on the Octagon card to disable the SCSI. I disabled it, stuck the card in there, boom, recognized the 8 megs on the card, apparently pretty nicely. That gave me a total of 12 megabytes of fast RAM and 1 megabyte of chip RAM. Then I could run almost anything I needed to. The way it works is programs grab the 32-bit fast memory first because that has priority and everything runs faster in there. If it runs out of 32-bit RAM, it will then start pulling off the 24-bit RAM and putting code into there. If you run out of 24-bit RAM, then it will go down and start putting code into the 16-bit chip RAM. It's pretty darn amazing. There's a performance hit when you do that, but it's not as bad as you'd expect. Now, think about this. Our Amigas, with its architecture from 1985, can combine 32-bit memory with 24-bit memory with 16-bit memory, and everything just works. I plug these things in, it's like, oh yeah, I got RAM, I'm working, fine. Try that on any PC from 1985. Try to get different kinds of memory to work in there. Matter of fact, try on a machine from 1985, a PC, to get more than 1 megabyte of memory to be recognized with any program. Just doesn't really happen. Only Amiga makes it possible. Now let's take a look at the GoTech Drive in here real quick. Remember, in part 1 and 2, she was mounted in an ill-fitting white mount that was designed for the Amiga 500. It looked like a big white tooth hanging right out the front there. Well, my good friend and fellow Amiga enthusiast Mike Kopak was not going to tolerate that. So Mike is the guy that sold me my lovely 1541-2 drive that matches so nice with my 64C. He got in touch with me after watching my video, and he sent me this A2000 GoTech bracket here, 3D printed, and painted it to quite nicely match the color of the Amiga 2000. I think it matches really good. He also sent me a speaker for my GoTech and a rotary knob for choosing your different things, which is actually much easier than the buttons that I'm used to using. The rotary knob works really well. Now, he was also kind enough to help me troubleshoot the rotary knob when it wouldn't function. Turns out I'd accidentally bridged a connection, and there was a bit of flux on the GoTech board that shorted it out. The rotary wasn't working. We tried a few things, and then I realized, oops, I shorted it out, cleaned it up, poof, rotary knob works now. And Mike, thank you for all of your help. I really appreciate that. You may have also noticed that I'm using a laser mouse on my Amiga 2000 and not my standard tank mouse. Now I've got a tank mouse, it works absolutely perfectly and I enjoy using it, but I want to start experimenting with the wheel and some of the options available with the wheel mouse on the Amiga. So our good friends at amigastore.eu sold me this interface. This is less than $20 and it's a 9-pin joystick interface. It works with either the Atari or the Amiga, and then it lets you use a standard USB mouse with it. It's got a little chip in there. Now the cool thing about this one is this works on the early startup menu, and it also works in every game that I've tried it in because the USB stack is actually running on this little chip here. It does not need any driver or anything on your Amiga. So this works just fine with just about any Amiga program, whether you boot from floppy or not. Unlike something like the Rapid Road USB, where you hook up a mouse there and it will never work with a game and it will never work on early boot up. We had a nice working system, fast processor, plenty of RAM, Ethernet card, which I'll cover a little bit more in a minute, but we weren't done yet. I wanted to use my new 16-bit ISA slots that I had installed in my case. You can see the little beauties right there. So I grabbed my A2386 bridge board that I used so much in the 90s on my Amiga 3000, hooked her up in there, and I ran into nothing but problems. It would boot the bridge board, but it would not recognize the floppy, it would not recognize any other device, and it would just constantly error out, not recognize the keyboard. There's something flaky with my bridge board, and I knew it because when I played with it a few months ago on my Amiga 3000, I got the same results. So there's something wrong with my bridge board. But if you remember, and if you want to watch my video on it right there, I also own an A2088 bridge board, which is the XT bridge board with 512K of RAM. That works absolutely perfectly. So I took that out, installed it in here, hooked up my beautiful 5 1/4 360K floppy. I also use an 8-bit card here that adds a dedicated serial and parallel, and even a game port on here. But I'm not going to play games on here. I mean, seriously, an XT game when I have an Amiga sitting right here, no, I'd rather play a VIC-20 game than an XT game. Sorry, guys. Now, here's the other cool thing. If I want to use 3.5-inch 720K floppies on my bridge board, I can just use my external floppy right there. It plugs right into the back of the bridge board. There's a standard floppy connector there. As soon as you hook that up, boom, instant B drive 720K 3.5-inch floppy works perfect. I want to switch back to using a real floppy on the Amiga. I can just, of course, turn it off, plug it back into the Amiga side, and then I can access 3.5-inch floppies on my Amiga. Best of both worlds. Now, being that this is an XT, I'm not really worried about the fact that I've got a 5.25-inch drive here. Most stuff written for the XT was written for 5.25-inch 360K floppies, so when I find it used, that's the format it's probably going to be in anyways. I can also just make new discs on my PC in 3.5-inch format, no problem at all. Let's take a quick look at how the bridge board works on the Amiga. So I've got two icons down here, one called PC Color and the other called Viaduct. Viaduct is a third-party program that's still in active development. It's really designed to use your bridge board with retargetable graphics systems, but it works perfectly fine on OCS, ECS, and AGA machines too. First off, let's launch PC Color and see what happens. This is the Commodore Amiga version of it here. No, we don't want to promote the screen. And look at that. We have the MS-DOS shell. We're able to do everything in here in the DOS shell, or we can exit out and go to regular DOS also. Ta-da! Isn't that exciting? MS-DOS. Now exit out of here and launch Viaduct, and what this does is it will open up the same screen, but it will do it in a movable window right on your workbench, which makes it really kind of cool, especially if you've got retargetable graphics, nice big screen. You can just have a small window with all your DOS stuff right here. Now, this will work in whatever resolution you're in. I happen to be in a 31.5 kilohertz resolution right here. We'll talk about in a few minutes. So we've only got 4 colors, but if you get this on a 16 color screen or a 256 color screen on AGA, that's what it will try and use. It's actually pretty cool. Now, just as a side note, when you use any kind of bridge board, it uses the address space for the top 2 megabytes of 24-bit fast RAM. So like on my 8 megabyte Octagon card here, I had to yank 2 megs out of it and tell it to only use 6 megabytes of RAM. You see there's 4 megs, 2 megs, and then 4 megs for the 32-bit memory here. It's just a fact of life. It doesn't care how much 32-bit RAM you have in here, but if it's 24-bit RAM, bridge board maxes out 6 megabytes. Now, I thought long and hard on how I wanted to display my Amiga 2000. Okay, of course I could use my 1084 and act like it was 1987 again or 1988 again, but with my old eyes and that flickering on there, it just drives me crazy. And since I'm not a huge Amiga gamer and I want productivity software to be displayed as nicely as possible, I love a good LCD panel. First thing I tried was the good old standard SCART cable to HDMI. That works just fine, but on all mine, I get this snow and banding that scrolls up and down the screen whenever I use mine. It's not horrible, not too distracting, I'm used to it, but I thought I could do better. So I got out my RetroTink, which I reviewed right there, and I hooked up my RGB to component cables to the RetroTink. Now that gives you about the best display that you can possibly imagine out of an Amiga like this. Just absolutely fantastic. Colors are rich, colors are vibrant, but it will not work in 31.5 kilohertz modes like this. The multi-scan and the double NTSC modes that I'm using here just refuses to work, and I wanted access to those modes too. So I went to number 3, which is a device created by Edu Arana. Now, he didn't create these. We've had RGB to VGA adapters for years, but he uses special buffering, special chips on there to enhance the brightness, enhance the contrast, and give you the best VGA signal out of your Amiga that you can possibly get. This, in conjunction with a multi-sync monitor like this NEC here, and I did a whole show on multi-sync monitors. I can try and link to it right up there. Gives me the best of all worlds. In Workbench, I can work in one of these 4-color modes like 640 by 480, rock solid 31.5 kilohertz. If I want to do 320 by 200 games, no problem at all. Ham mode, no problem at all. That solution handles everything that I currently need, and the quality is outstanding. Like you can see here, here's a nice ham, 12-bit ham image that I did last year, and the quality is just outstanding on the monitor. Picture is absolutely fantastic with Edu Arana's display adapter, so I recommend looking into that. And what other computer system on the planet would you have been able to do this, where you've got a 31.5 kilohertz display, drag it down, and see a ham display behind it? It's pretty cool, isn't it? Yeah, try that on your Mac from 1985. Ain't gonna work. Here's another hint for you. Take a look at my chip memory at the top of the screen, 922K free. As I open up new windows, that memory is hardly touched, if at all. I can open up all kinds of windows on here, no problem at all. I can even have a background image like you see right there, my 10-mark image, hardly touches the memory. Now, you can do this by downloading Picasso 96, which is the software for retargetable graphics cards. And then you get this driver called Native. Goes right in your monitors folder. No icon. Show all files. There it is, Native. All right, you put Native in your monitors folder, and what happens is that it then will use some of the features of Picasso 96, like the ability to store icon data, window data, and some picture data in fast RAM instead of chip RAM. If I didn't have that program running, I'd be down to about 600 or 700 kilobytes of chip RAM. Now, 922. Get it, try it out. I'll put the links in the description. Now, I covered last episode about my Ethernet card. I've got a Commodore A2065, ended up getting a nice little interface that converts the AUI adapter on the back to Ethernet. Spent about 25 bucks on that. Best investment ever, fantastic. That gets my Amiga 2000 online on the internet as soon as I plug her in. I use the Roadshow program for TCP/IP, but to save memory, what I do is I don't initiate the TCP/IP protocols until I'm ready to, and it just saves a little bit of RAM. I just click my A2065 icon down there when I'm ready to get online, connects right up, saves 100, 200 kilobytes of RAM. Why not? Now, you're not going to be doing any heavy-duty web browsing on an ECS machine. It just isn't worth it, even though it functions, just not worth it. But what I do use it for is FTPing into my PC, so I can transfer data back and forth between my Amiga and my PC without any problems at all. Just connect to the 10-mark site, put in my super secret password, no peeking. Now it gives me my full listing of my shared FTP site right on my PC. I'm able to transfer things back and forth between my Amiga and my PC all day long. And even though it's just a 10 megabit per second interface, it's not too bad. It's really fairly fast, and it does the job just fine. I can transfer a 2 or 3 megabyte JPEG file in 10, 15 seconds. A lot faster than copying it onto a ADF or something and transferring it over, or copying it onto a floppy. Works really well. Now iBrowse, the web browser, also works on this machine, and it works just fine. Now I'm having an issue with MUI. I have MUI 5.0 on here, and when I try to change screen modes, locks up the Amiga. Not sure why yet, I'm investigating it. But iBrowse runs fine on the desktop, on Workbench. As you can tell, a little slow. I clicked it a long time ago, like 2 years ago, and it's just loading up right now. Looks kind of funky in 4-color multi-scan mode, but I use this for getting on AmiNet and downloading things from AmiNet. What else do I want to do? I'm not going to get on Facebook on this. No point to it. It is slow, but then again, iBrowse is slow on my 060 machine, and even on my Vampires, it's not going to break any speed records, but it works. Here we're getting on AmiNet. I think you'll recognize the screen just fine. We've all been on it a million times. Totally fully functional. If it ever loads this week. These are 10-minute episodes. Come on. These guys expect me to do 10-minute episodes. Then I got to deal with this slowness right here. Absurd. Seriously. Still waiting. And through the magic of careful editing, it looks like it comes up quickly. Actually, it's not too bad. I mean, I waited 20 seconds or so for the screen to come up. I can browse through, download anything on AmiNet I want. Works fine. The other cool thing is you can get something like, I think it's Desterm, that handles Telnet, and you can use this to get on any BBS that you want to. So like the Awesome Particles BBS or Skynet BBS, any of those. They work just fine on here. So before we go, how does this thing handle games? Because we all know the Amiga is very popular for playing games. With the Romulator, I'm able to boot up and switch between different versions of the Amiga OS ROM. So if I want to launch an old Amiga OS 1.3 game, I can use Kickstart 1.3. Of course, you can use WHD load for all this stuff too, but we're having some fun here. With my GoTech Drive, I'm able to just dial in to whatever game I want to launch here. This one happens to be River Raid Reloaded, which is a game that came out a couple of years ago. Fantastic River Raid clone. Now, it works in PAL mode, but as you know, when you have an ECS Amiga, you can go into the early startup menu, change your display options to PAL, and now when we boot, she should boot up right in PAL mode, no problems at all, and we'll be able to try out some games. See, works absolutely flawlessly. Audio comes through fine on my little speakers. This is a fantastic game. If you have not tried River Raid Reloaded yet, find a copy, totally free, download it, plays on any PAL machine. So, we've determined games play just fine on here, and as a matter of fact, most games play fine on a 68030. It's once you get into the 040 that you start having some real compatibility issues. Now, there's no real way to turn off the 030 and go back to 68000 with a TerribleFire, but if I was really going to be playing games on this thing, I would just use WHD load anyways, which takes care of all that stuff for you. But for the amount of stuff that I do, the games I play, this is going to be just perfect. So what's next for this little guy? Because, you know, this is an Amiga. Amigas are never done. You're never finished. You're never, oh, hey, it's complete. No, you always have to add a little something to it. Well, I'm going to order one of those new RGB to HDMI. Here's a little picture right here. Adapters. There's one that's specifically designed for the Amiga 2000 that looks really cool. And I want to see just what these can do. From what I've heard, the display quality is just fantastic. It's going to be even better than this, and I'm really hoping that it works with all of the video modes. But I'll be doing a show on that in a couple of weeks after I get my adapter in. I do want to fix my 386 bridge board, figure out what's wrong with that. Maybe I've got a bad GAL chip on there or something. I'll put it out to the community, see if anyone's willing to help me troubleshoot it, figure out what the problem is. I'd love to have Windows 3.1 running in a window on here. It'd be kind of cool. I need to get the LED for the hard drive working. I worked with Edu Arana a little bit yesterday on it. I have a patron by the name of Matius Stanisiu, and I probably just butchered your name, buddy. I'm so sorry. But he asked me the other day if I would look into how to get the hard drive LEDs working on a Vampire. So I started doing some research and realized it's the same method as getting it to work on here. You tap into pin 39 on the IDE header, and that's the activity light, and then you can hook an LED up to that. Won't work on here. Everything I've tried, every time I try and hook it up, no matter what, locks up the Amiga. So I'm doing something wrong. I'm thinking it's possibly my CF adapter, because I'm hooking directly into that's giving me the issue. So I'm going to try a different CF adapter, see if I can get the hard drive LED working. Speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank my absolutely wonderful patrons who help me out so much, make it possible for me to get things like the TerribleFire in here that I'm going to do a full review on in a couple of weeks. You can learn every little piece about it. We'll try it out in a couple of different machines, and don't tell anyone, but we might try it out in the Atari too. It's supposedly compatible with the Atari ST. We'll try that too. Thank you guys so much. You're the best. If you'd like to become a patron and show up on that beautiful list, just stop on by to patreon.com/10mark, $2 a month, you're in. Now, we've had a lot of fun in this project. I've really enjoyed putting this thing together, finding all the cool things we can do for it, finding a use for a lot of my older Zorro cards that I hadn't really had a need for in a long time. Now it's taken longer than I expected. I wanted to do 3 episodes, 1 a week, but had issues with the bridge board, had issues with this, issues with that, had to sort them all out before I could film the episodes. Changed my mind half a dozen times too. I'm happy with the performance. I would have loved an Amiga with these capabilities back in the late 80s. It would have been absolutely killer. Now, even at 48 megahertz, it does not feel as fast as my Amiga 3000 at 16 megahertz. And again, it's because of the greater bandwidth to chip RAM and greater bandwidth to the custom chips that the Amiga 3000 had that makes it feel faster, even though the CPU was substantially slower. Thanks for joining me on this little adventure. You're going to see more about this Amiga 2000 in the future. I'll be using it as a test bed system. I loved to hear your comments about what you've done with your Amiga 2000s and what you'd like me to do with mine. I'm taking a lot of them to heart, trust me. Please like and subscribe and follow me on Twitter at 10mark1. But until next time, this is Doug from 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast, signing out. Now, where am I going to put this beast? I can't leave it on the kitchen table. My wife's going to kill me if I leave it out here. Where am I going to put this thing?